will read this to you guys. Read along with me, and then I want you to have just a couple seconds of conversation about when you think this quote came about. It says, "The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers." So it's attributed to Socrates, but it's in that philosophical area of enlightenment, right? When we were really thinking about how to be prim and proper. Any of that sound familiar? Does this sound like if we just didn't say dainties, we could pretty much describe how we feel sometimes about kids in our class, or kids that we see out in restaurants, or how we handle and manage behavior? And children have always been tyrants, but only because that's part of their learning process. And I think that's the thing that we always have to keep in mind, is that developmentally, kids are wired to walk the edge, and a child that doesn't know the boundary of that edge is going to continue to push until they find that edge. So part of PBIS is developing those boundaries so that they know where to push, and that they know what the consequence is going to be, and they know what they're going to get if they stay within those boundaries. That's all developmentally appropriate. So are you guys, let me get a better sense of, all instructional, or do we have any student services staff?
Assistant.
Yes. Assistant, thank you. Yeah. Fabulous. All right, I started as a paraprofessional, so thank you for all of your hard work. Just as a reminder about those tiers of support, and again, I'm not going to beat the horse with tiers of support, but as we look at it, what you guys are really defining and developing are those tier 1 supports, those school-wide supports, those things that are meant for everybody, everywhere. And that includes our administrative staff, that includes our parents and our volunteers, our students, and families that come on campus. Those school-wide supports should really be available to everybody.
And I was just thinking, even trying to include, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, maintenance staff. So everybody that kind of walks onto our campus or has a piece or a component of ownership on our campus needs to be exposed and have that understanding of what our expectations are for all.
Absolutely. And then in between that tier 1 and tier 2, in PBIS, we really try to focus on that classroom level, because that's where kids spend the majority of their time, and they need supports in the classroom as well. In fact, when we look at referrals, a lot of times the biggest chunk of referrals will come out of the classroom, which just statistically makes sense. That's where they're at. So they have more opportunity to engage in challenging behavior in the classroom. So sometimes we need to kind of float in between that tier 1 and tier 2 and have classroom systems that are set up that are aligned to that school-wide system. And then tier 2 support, so your smaller groups, your kids that need a little bit more support that aren't responding to tier 1. And when we think about it behaviorally, that means we have to be able to track. Have those kids gotten tickets or kudos, or what do you guys use as a system? Do you have bucks or stickers, or do you have bucks? Right? Blue tickets. So it's important to know, if we're going to think about this student isn't responding to tier 1, have they gotten those blue tickets? How many? By whom? So that we really know, has tier 1 not worked? So it's important to think about a tracking system for some of that, and you guys can have conversation around that a little bit later. And then tier 3 are students that need those most intensive supports. So a lot of times it's kids that have a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan, or they're getting some individualized social skills training.
Support or supplemental support in reading and Spanish, and then tier 3 support for science and math. So that student moves fluidly throughout the tiers depending on what that student's needs are, instead of kind of labeling them.
And the more I look at this, the more I think, if you just took basketball out, you could just call this Jenna's triangle.
Right. You need tier 3 for basketball.
Yeah, probably, yes. Or just height and skill. Yeah, I don't know if you could teach me.
And the other thing that this does is kind of focuses on that strength-based too. So we know those students that kind of stick out in needing those tier 2 or 3 supports, especially for behavior, that kind of rises to the top. But what are the things that they're able to maintain in that tier 1? Those are their strengths, and how do we build off of those strengths?
Absolutely.
And identify those strengths too. and celebrate and reinforce those strengths.
Right, like if I know that basketball is not only a skill and a strength, but a motivator, but they're struggling in math, how can I use that topic and embed it into my math conversations? How can I use basketball as a reinforcer for appropriate behavior? So it is really important to have that strength mindset instead of that deficit mindset, because it's the deficit that we have to spend so much time on, but if we flip that and we spend more time on those strengths, we may find that some of those other skills can be elevated by looking at those strengths that they have. Increase safety, giving students opportunities to respond. The thing about behavior, and again, we're going to go into it in more detail, but academics is behavior. So we really can't perform academically without behaving. So when we think about the skills of behavior and human behavior, that really works through all of the other skills that we expect students to engage in the classroom. So, you know, when we think about design question 6, establishing classroom routines, because I'm sure everybody can read that, right? Piece of cake. You've got it memorized. What am I thinking? You know, establishing those classroom routines, that is part of our school-wide expectations and then the rules that we create within the classroom aligned to those. So the school-wide expectations, and I'm teaching to the left side, so I'm going to try to step over here for just a second. I was videotaped. When I was a classroom teacher, I had somebody videotape me one time, not as a walkthrough, but just as like, what can I do better? And that was I teach to one side of the classroom, and I still do. So the power of being videotaped. So now I'm going to watch this and I'll be like, I sound terrible. I use my hands too much. And one time I walked over to the other side of the room, stage right. So school-wide expectations are that list of broad, positively stated expectations that we want everybody, everywhere, to be able to accomplish. So again, it says faculty and students, but as Alyssa pointed out too, it's family, it's every faculty member, our instructional assistants. I know when I was a parent in the classroom, I wasn't part of a lot of these conversations, so I'm glad that there is a good representation here to help with part of these conversations. Because typically your IAs, the people that are supporting the classrooms, are working with some of the most challenging students. Those kids whose name you learn first, right? You guys will, in the next couple weeks, you'll all learn a few names really quickly. That's how you know they're going to start needing additional supports usually. Yeah, exactly. You're just brave. I know, right? And then those should align with the district vision. So right now, there are 3 key priorities that we focus on in Pasco County. Data-based decision-making, inherent in positive behavior supports, right? We need to look at our data, make sure that we're problem-solving based on that data to make the most effective decisions. High-impact instruction, and I would say that instruction is both standards-based and also those social-emotional skills, social skills, behavioral skills that students need, because we need to teach those sometimes more in depth than some of our academic skills, and especially these first few weeks and months of school. Sometimes we need to focus our efforts even more on those skills, especially with our new little ones. And a little anecdote that happened to me yesterday about a parent of a kindergartner or a kindergarten student. Database decision making, high impact instruction, collaborative culture. That's this process, that's your PLCs, that's that PBIS team meeting and having conversation. That's the opportunity that you have to meet with community members and family members. That's really that process of engaging in conversations to make sure that we're all here to support our students. So yesterday, because you guys are going to have new little baby kindergartners coming in, right? Who cries more, the kindergartners or the parents? Parents. So I was giving a little.
Some parents are like, yes.
I know, right? I was giving a little spiel on our anti-bullying stuff in the district, and I had a parent come up to me afterwards. And didn't ask me anything about bullying, but said, you know, I have this kid, you know, my little daughter is going to start kindergarten soon, and it was like a medical question that really the nurse needed to answer, and I was just like, oh, sweet mom, it'll be okay, like the teachers will help, I promise. She was worried about her navigating the cafeteria, and I was like, they don't just let them run free. Trust me. They're going to have hula hoops to hold on to for the first couple of weeks, and bubbles in their mouth, and everything will be fine. But you could just tell that this was her first little baby going to kindergarten. And what I wanted to be able to say is a lot of our schools have all of these systems in place to make sure that there's safety and security and there's a process and they're learning all these expectations. When we talk about being strengths-based with students, it's also important that we focus on what's right in our environment. And I won't get too metaphysical with you, but unless you really want to get deep. Tyson Grasso, what's the physicist's name? Neil, thank you. See, I'll get metaphysical with you.
Okay.
There are 3 parts of our brain, and we're going to talk about our brain a little bit more when we talk about trauma and the impact of trauma, just very briefly. But there are 3 parts of our brain. The back part of our brain is the oldest part of our brain. It's the reptilian part of our brain, and that's our fight or flight response. And then the middle part of our brain is a little more developed, but that's like our reward and punishment center, right? Feels good, doesn't feel good, going to do it, not going to do it. And then the newest developed or newly developed part of our brain is our executive functioning skills, organizational skills, our inhibition, our ability to make good decisions and understand consequences. What's really important is that we're wired to focus on what's wrong in the environment because it's a fight or flight. It's a safety mechanism, right? See fire, run. See buffalo, run. That's a very deeply ingrained, deeply wired, innate thing that we have in our brains. So for us to change that and focus on what's right in the environment can be a struggle for people. It can be a struggle for me sometimes. I focus on where exits are. I try to sit facing doors, right? I grew up teaching in the EVD world, so I'm hyper vigilant about making sure that I can, use my CPI skills and move quickly if I need to. So we have to kind of rewire and make sure that we're not just focusing on violations or what's wrong in the environment, but we focus on what's right. And if we think about it metaphysically, if you want to go there, if we put out good energy and we focus on good energy is what comes back. And I'm not a deeply metaphysical person or anything like that, but we really are just a creature of molecules, and molecules are energy. So it makes sense that good energy out brings good energy in. My stepdaughter was living with us for a period of time, and she was struggling behaviorally and emotionally. And I had read this thing about the rice experiment. And if anybody's familiar with it, it's really fascinating. It's a great thing you can do in your classroom. But you cook plain rice. I think I used basmati, if you want to be fancy. Any old rice you have laying around the house. Just cook a little bit of it. Put about a cup or a half a cup into Tupperware, and then put another cup or half a cup, make sure they're even, into another Tupperware. And then for a period of about 2 weeks, pick up 1 cup of that rice and tell it good things. Be nice to it. Give it compliments. Tell it that you love it. Label them so you know which one's which. So you do to the right one every day, right? And then the other one, degrade it. Say nice or bad things to it. Yell at it. And see what happens. And I will let you guys hypothesize what happens, but it works. And after my stepdaughter saw that, because what was happening is she didn't like our family dog, and she was kind of rude to it. And after the rice experiment, she realized that what she was putting out there was what she was really getting back from everybody else in the world. And she thought that it was everybody else, when really it was her that needed to make some changes. She's still working on it.
Jenna just went out yesterday to buy more rice.
Seriously, I just eat it all now. It's fine.
You're like, you taste good.
I know, right? Yes, I love you, Rice. You're fabulous.
But when you think about your classroom too, that makes sense. So we're the adults in there, right? What we put out, we get back. So just kind of a framework or a perspective or a lens to kind of think of things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that doesn't mean that that's going to be 100% effective every time, but it definitely just changes our focus and our view, and kind of, it made me think differently about how I respond. And then again, the opposite of that is true. If we focus on the positive, then we should see more positive. We're more likely to focus on that and to point that out. It's the law of intent. Anybody ever At one point, I wanted a new car, and it was a specific make and model of a car. And all of a sudden, everywhere you go, you see that make and model of a car, right? That's the law of intent. It's not that there are more Honda CR-Vs in the world, right? It's just that I focused energy on that, and so I see it more often. Anytime you go through a breakup, you know, all you see then are couples, right? Every song on the radio is about breaking up. Right? That's that law of intent. It just means that your brain is more focused on that. So the more that we focus on positive, the more that we're likely to see that in the environment and be able to focus our energy and efforts toward that positive. And that's good for us to know, and it's good for us to work with our students who need to understand some of that too. Maybe we can help them focus on what's right with classmates, with peers, with other classrooms, with other students. So school-wide expectations, it's really about being consistent. Kids are going to be the first ones that identify loopholes in your system, right? They're very savvy. They pay a lot of attention to what's happening in the school. In fact, I recommend a lot of times, even at the elementary level, you probably have some 4th or 5th graders that are mature enough to be part of some of the conversations about developing some of this work. You probably have some school leaders that stand out. I would also say that maybe the ones that find the loopholes, they're good to have conversations with too, because they'll help you identify what's working and not working. So don't always focus on those kids that do everything well. Think about having conversations with some of them that are struggling, because they're struggling because of some of those loopholes. So it's good if we have consistency in those expectations at the classroom level. It's better if we have it at the team level. But it's more better if we have it at that grade level or with our PLCs, our teams, and it's bestest if we have it school-wide. That consistency is one of those tenets of trauma-informed care. If kids have that predictability, if they know that I can go from your classroom to your classroom and those expectations are the same, the rules might be a little different, right? The rules might identify different behaviors for different settings, but the expectation is the same. And the language that I have a conversation with that student, that's consistent, that creates that boundary. Now I know I don't need to try to step over that cliff, right? I know that boundary, I know that expectation. So consistency is really key.
Yeah, it helps with transparency. So like nothing's a secret, we're all on the same page. Kids need that. They also need that predictability, right? And then that kind of furnishes that safety and security that all kids need. So again, all those tenets, and we're going to talk about a little bit more about trauma-informed care, but really important, for kids to be successful. And even just think about you guys too. So
school's already fallen. The first day we're all back.
So even for you guys, like thinking about, being the teachers or instructional assistants or the cafeteria workers, that consistency piece, right? It helps with your predictability, safety, and security. Your transparency that, when you come to work, you all have the same expectation. You know what that is of you and for your kids, no matter where you are on the campus. That's really important for us, as the adults on the campus.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, part of that is you guys being the experts in some of this and being able to share and help create that consistency by modeling it, by working with other staff, by being role models. So that everybody really can be on the same page when it comes to, especially those school-wide expectations. Been a while since you've heard that, huh? I know, I felt a little heart starting to beat.
Here they come.
Yeah, exactly. Break's over, right? Transition time is beginning. So I want to share just a couple little examples of these, just so you guys have some kind of framework and references, and I know that you've already done work around school-wide expectations, but these will just reinforce the importance of them, and I believe that most of them are on Teaching Channel, which is a fabulous resource. Really going to class it up.
Would you like to come and line up over here? John Bailey spent the day at Meadows School in Lincoln with former Teacher of the Year Andy Bell as he knocked his New Year's 6 into shape. First, Andy broke the ice.
Morning, Chloe. Thank you, and you too. How are you feeling? Nervous, that's okay. Good morning, Anisha. How are you? Excited, great.
So when you're calling the register, you ask children how they are?
Yes.
And you take their answers seriously?
Yes. And if somebody says they're not okay, then I know that the way that I deal with them that day will need to be different.
Then, a reminder about equipment.
First activity this morning. Make a list of 10 things that your character might want to bring to school on the first day. I think that would be my first choice if I was him as well. And what about number 5? Pencil case.
Next, he set the noise level.
The football is on silent. How do you think we ought to be working when we're learning about this together? What should we be doing? If I put it up here, do you think there would be anything on your pages at the end of 15 or 20 minutes? Oh, who said it depends? It does depend. But I'm going to make the choice for you this morning. I'm going to put it just above. This says, on your own, no nattering.
Followed by some rewards.
But I have some good work tickets here, and I will write your name on it, and I'll write why. And on this side, there's a little ticket, and then we're going to put it in the Homer Simpson tin.
Let no one out there believe that they're too old for tangible reward. Homer Simpson and the tickets in the tin.
Yeah.
Batamaloo, that's going in big time, isn't it?
Then, the listening expectation.
And if I say give me 5, then there are 5 things that we need to do. Number 1 means I'm keeping my hands to myself. Okay. Number 2 says my feet are still. It helps us to concentrate if we're not moving them all over the place and making a noise. Number 3 says I'm silent, and there's a funny picture with a mouth that's a zip. Number 4 says my eyes are on the speaker. If I'm having a conversation with someone and they're doing this, I don't think they're interested. When we get to 5, we're all ready to learn.
And finally, he involved the children in drawing up the class rules.
And don't be mean. What's being mean? What kind of things? Okay, so violent or vicious, calling somebody name. At a later date, we'll come back to that and look at it in a bit more detail, and then maybe share the things that are common to all of them, and then they form the basis for the rules.
Is the job done in terms of managing their behaviour?
I always make a point of continually just doing the same thing and keep reinforcing it, but yeah, I'm quite happy with how it's working at the moment.
So what are some of the things that stand out to you in that video? What do you guys think would work? What are things that you guys do?
He's always wild.
He is. He's very engaging, right? I recommend everybody try a British accent.
Because every
couple weeks. Exactly, I know. Say nattering.
Watch the kindergartners go like,
I know, right?
You're laughing at me.
Yeah. What else?
What about the role of the kids and all that, the students?
Do any of you guys collectively as a class create your classroom rules? Have students have ownership in some of that? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how does that work for you?
They're usually harsher.
Yes,
they
they
are.
are.
I
Kids
know.
are. I know. And that's a great conversation to have with them.
They are
Absolutely.
usually, and so they make the boundaries very tight. So actually, I found you have to loosen them up a lot, because there's no way they can't go 5 minutes without
Yes.
crossing over the line.
Absolutely. And then you're like a superhero because you're like, gosh, I was gonna let you guys do this. And they're like, oh, she's fabulous. And it gives them autonomy. The best thing about creating collaborative rules is that anytime they're violated, you say, these are the rules that you guys agreed to. And so as a teacher, I always had my non-negotiables, like these are the things I need to make sure are addressed. But then as a community, we would create our classroom rules. And most of the time they were more harsh. Almost 100% of the time they aligned to what I was already expecting needed to be on there, right? Every once in a while there might be some weird thing that they would throw in there, like, we need to have slushies at 4 p.m. every day. And then, you just talk through that. But I agree, it's such a great process to do with students. What else stood out in that video?
I like that he said expectations from the beginning.
Absolutely. And that he said that he reviews them, right? He asked, is this it for you? And he was like, no, I keep going through them. And we know those big times after breaks, after weekends, Anytime that a student engages in a challenging behavior, that's a teaching opportunity. That's where you can go back to that process and remind them, remember what our expectations are in the classroom. Remember what your expectations are in the hallway. Practice that for me, right? Let me see what it looks like. Give them that opportunity to physically practice it.
So I always try to liken it to, academics, right? So, you're reading with a student and, they mispronounce a word, they're not decoding it right, and you have them kind of go back and practice it. And so it's the same thing for behavior, and that piece often gets missed and it's not looked at the same way, right? So just try to, make the parallels to that academic piece the same thing as behavior. So, they display an inappropriate behavior. We need to remind them, what the expectation or rule is. We need to reteach that and then have them practice it, right? And then give feedback after that, just like you would do in reading, math, or any kind of, content area.
Absolutely. Very good point. Very good point.
Did you have something to say?
Well, I was going to say, this is the second time that I heard it too, was when he was doing the roll call, he asked them how they were doing. And I was like, that makes sense, because if you know that this morning started rough, that someone picked on them or whatever, that throws the rest of the day off.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So okay, I need to talk to them, calm them down or whatever, and then just give them, just deal with them.
Yeah, and it helps build that relationship. And just think of, Gallup poll, or, that question that always comes up, like, do I have somebody at the school that cares about me, right? Asking somebody how they're doing is so simple, but it shows that, like, somebody has taken an investment in me and really care about, me as a person. Right?
And then also following up on that. So, he said, I know that I need to do things differently if I hear that somebody is anxious or nervous. So it's validating that kids do have emotions and challenges and things that maybe they aren't able to work through. And so maybe if I know that somebody's feeling anxious or nervous that morning, I can decrease the demands on them for a period of time and then come back to that later, so that I'm not trying to make them do something at a point where they're probably not emotionally ready to do that work. That's incredibly important. So in restorative practices, which is a process of repairing harm, there's also a piece of building community, and that's like our morning meetings, basically. That's traditionally how I remember it. But it's that opportunity to get everybody together to look at each other and to focus on how are you doing? What's happening with you? How are you feeling? And taking that short amount of time, sometimes in the mornings, can address and reduce the need to handle all that challenging behavior later on. I'd rather take 15 minutes in the morning to kind of talk through some of that than 45 minutes later in the day to deal with a challenging behavior.
So one of our unofficial mantras in student services, and you've probably heard this before, is that kids come to school with more than just books in their backpack. So just think about that every morning when they're showing up, entering your classroom.
Yeah, especially these first few weeks. They're just as anxious and excited and nervous and scared and happy as you guys are. You guys know the routine. So it's definitely, this time of year, incredibly important. So this is looking at Slant, another acronym that you guys are probably familiar with, but a really great classroom management tool
Slant
to use.
stands for sit up straight, listen, ask and answer questions, nod, and track the speaker.
Martha Captain, 3 vertebrae stacked in 2. Thanks for your focus in 1.
It's actually something that came out of the KIPP charter schools and has been just really effective in our classroom in terms of, 1, helping students be sitting in a way that's going to help them learn, and 2, reinforcing some of the life skills that they need outside of our classroom to truly be college bound.
So, heard of before, like a process to help orient. Okay, that's a great one in there. And
Yes.
so there's neurobiological research about how kids need to feel grounded, meaning that they, your brain works better when both feet are on the ground. And I'm a leg crosser, like to the degree that I'll probably have really bad varicose veins. But I think as women, unfortunately, we learn that habit, and it may not be the best habit for how we learn. But it's also something that just helps people feel grounded. And again, when we go back to the science of our brains. That's what we need to learn. There are all of these fascinating things that people are starting to learn about what helps us activate our brain and our knowledge, right? Crossing the meridian, right? If any of you guys have kids cross their legs and cross their arms, that makes both sides of the brain reconnect. So every once in a while, take a little brain break and have kids cross their legs, cross their arms, do it the opposite direction. Really simple little brain breaks that kids can take. Even if they are too little to put their feet on the ground, if they're little ones, you can get a little Xerox box top and put it on the ground so that they can put their feet on top of that. You can actually cut holes, put the legs through it. Some kids who need to kind of bounce and have that movement, you can tie old pantyhose or like the exercise bands around the bottom so that they can shake, but they still have their feet on something so that they're grounded. Lots of little tips and tricks for those kids that need to have that movement. Because I'm a non-traditionalist, like I do think it's good to have kids orient, to have kids sitting still. Those are life skills. That's what's going to get them through school, because that's a pretty common expectation. But there are also people that just need to move. So like in my classroom, I always had you need to touch your desk. You can stand, you can walk, you can shake, but I just need a finger on the desk somewhere so that I know that you're in your space. So you guys have to create some of that, but just make sure that whatever it is that you have in your classroom, it aligns to those school-wide expectations, right? And you guys have your acronym DBES, and you have expectations that align to that, and you guys actually have a matrix that you're going to be working on. But it's just important to make sure that those are consistent. And then one last one on classroom culture. Because again, remember, as a district, we're focused on a collaborative culture. That includes how our students interact with each other as well. It doesn't just apply to us.
All right, back in 3, 2, 1. Establishing a strong classroom culture is essential because it's sort of like the bed that you plant the flowers in. You have to have that in order for things to flourish and grow. Students have to feel safe in your classroom. You have to normalize error. Is it okay to make mistakes? Yeah. They have to know that it's okay to try and try and try again. Mistakes are easy to fix. That you will actually learn more if you fail often. Who would like to share something? I have a really serious conversation with my students at the beginning of the year about their ownership in our classroom culture and how each of them is responsible for maintaining our learning environment. I believe in myself and my ability to do my best. We've written a classroom pledge together. I can learn, I will learn. Establishing our hopes and dreams and goals for the year that we then use as a measure for our behavior throughout the rest of the year. If someone's offending or interrupting or not staying on task, we will actually stop and have a conversation as a class. Is this something that's going to help us achieve our hopes and dreams, or is this something against? And the students are able to make that judgment and respond to each other. And hearing it from your peer that you're interrupting my learning is oftentimes more effective than me redirecting. And go. So taking the time to really have students buy in to the idea that we're on a journey, and if we're all doing the things we're supposed to do, we're going to get where we need to go. I am too focused on my hopes and dreams to waste today. I am college bound.
Some of the things in there that stick out, any ahas?
It's good that the kids actually check each other out.
Absolutely.
And it helps us a lot when one peer can tell the other, hey, listen, you need to follow the rules.
Absolutely. Peers are very influenced by each other. And a lot of times, like if we have a student that's attention seeking, we'll create this plan about getting attention from the adults when really it's their peers that are maintaining that attention, and we need to kind of change what kind of attention they're getting from their peers. Yeah, peers are very influential for each other. and they outnumber us, right? So, I mean, if they're hearing it from 20 other peers, that's impacting their learning, we're teaching empathy, right? We're teaching some very important social skills when we engage in that conversation. Absolutely. She had some really good classroom management strategies kind of hidden in there too. What were some of the things that you guys noticed?
Well, the affirmations.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like most children don't really think beyond the day or lunch, really. And so to have that goal reinforced continually is letting them know that they're actually working for something and that it's actually attainable. So it's real, so they're affirming that every day.
Absolutely. And a pledge like that is something that you could do every morning on a consistent basis to the point where at the end of the year they have it memorized and they own it then. Exactly. She had an attention signal. And I always try to teach this, you should have a place for your attention signal, and then you shouldn't do instruction from that place. That should just be your attention signal. In the world of behavior analysis, that's important because it creates stimulus control. So what happens if I consistently go to one place and get everybody's attention? When I start to move toward that place, eventually, kids are gonna know she's gonna try to get our attention. And that's how you know, like, it's working for me. Really great little strategies in there too, and all of those little things help build that culture of the classroom. When she said that we stop the class if people are being disruptive in the class, that's what we would consider like a restorative practice. That student needs to then repair that harm with their peers and find some way to fix that so that we work collaboratively together. There's also a process, because you talked about the importance of peers, called positive peer reporting, which is the opposite of tattling. In the research, they call it tootling, which is just fun to say. But that's a process of teaching kids to report positive things about each other. And that's incredibly powerful for kids to know that another kid was complimenting them or appreciated something that they did. Again, great social skills.
You can do that as a class, or if you have classroom jobs, like that could be a classroom job, you know, for that day or for that week for that student, you know, to report, you know, kind things that they observe or see.
Really good when you have a sub, you know, like when you're gonna be out, to make sure that there's somebody that can be there to report the good stuff. Otherwise, you're just gonna get a list of everything that went wrong that day. So your school-wide expectations: do your best, be prepared, eagerly follow directions, and show respect. Great school-wide expectations. One of the most important things, though, is what do those things look like in all of the different settings? And how do we do that consistently? Especially when I think about words like respect. Does everybody in here have a consistent definition of respect? What do you guys think? Do you guys think that if I counted to 3 and I said, tell me your definition of respect, you guys would all say the same thing? No. How come? I see heads shaking no. Why do you think?
Because background, I think, plays a lot into it. Culture.
Yes, of course. And that's the same thing with our kids. So I hear adults say all the time, are you being respectful? Is that respectful? Well, maybe it is for that student. I don't know. I can't really judge that. I don't know what respect in their neighborhood or at home looks like.
Or at home it is. Absolutely.
Exactly. I can do that at home. That's okay. I know you guys have heard that from kids. Right? And it's probably true. So we have to come up with that definition and make sure that we all understand that consistent definition and they understand that consistent definition. So that when I do have that conversation, is that being respectful? Remember, our school-wide expectation is to be respectful or show respect, that they all know what that looks like. So it's great to have these school-wide expectations. I'm going to try to give you guys a little bit of time to dig through your the matrix that's in front of you and try to come up with, what do those behaviors look like? So as a classroom teacher, when you come up with your classroom rules or your classroom matrix, that's really what you're doing. You're taking your school-wide expectations and you're saying, what does do your best look like in our classroom? What does be prepared look like in our classroom? What are the behaviors? What are the things I need to say? What does eagerly follow directions?
And remember, when you're thinking about what you want students to do, for the rules in each of these settings, it should be stated positively, right? So it shouldn't be like don't run, because kids will be like, okay, I'll skip, I'll jump, I'll hop, right?
I'll crawl.
So we want to make sure that the rules are telling our students and the adults around what we want students to do in that setting,
Right.
you know, to be respectful, or to be, you know, prepared.
Absolutely. So I see you guys already digging into some of that, and you can see that there's some work to be done, and that's perfectly fine. That's why we have this opportunity to do some of this work. But then you also, as a PBS team, as a group, you're going to want to define what do those expectations then look like in the restroom, on the playground, the bus loop, for walkers, for riders, in the cafeteria. Think about all the different settings. And what a lot of schools will do is they'll have matrix that teachers can add into in the classroom. In fact, I've seen some really great examples of schools printing out a laminated copy so that teachers could write in their classroom rules aligned to the expectations, because then that gives them the opportunity to have a little autonomy. Like, I still want to create my own rules for my classroom, and I want to do it with my kids, but I'm going to make sure I follow the process and they align to the school-wide expectations. And then schools will print out different matrices to put in the restrooms so that there's that consistency in the hallways. And as a school, you guys can think about what are the most important places right now. Maybe look at your data. Do we have a lot of referrals coming off of the playground or in the cafeteria? Maybe we need to focus some time on making sure that those rules and expectations are in the cafeteria, and how
applicable it is, you know, in elementary world, but maybe more so with the intermediate students. But some schools have come up with, you know, what does it look like in the virtual world? So not just in the computer lab, but, you know, when you're using social media, or, you know, using, you know, yeah. So something to kind of keep in mind, that, you know, that might be something to add on as well, right? Our world is constantly changing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then some schools have even taken it way further and helped create matrices for home. So they give a blank, right, our expectations, and they put home on top, and they let parents come up with how would we align that. That's after some training with parents, after parent nights and conferences, and kind of aligning them to what's happening at the school. But that's a great way to build some of that partnership and have that consistency. Think about it, if you can communicate with a parent and a student and say, remember, this is what it looks like at school, this is what it looks like at home. Are we being respectful? Are we showing respect everywhere?
And with that, the other piece too is, you know, how does this information, once you guys kind of solidify this, how does this get shared then with parents? So, you know, do you have it posted to your website? Is it in your class, you know, newsletter, or however you communicate? So that parents have the same understanding as the kids do, and we're kind of getting them all on the same page, right? So if you have to kind of write a note in the planner or talk to a parent, you can refer them to, well, this is our school-wide expectations, this is the rule that, you know, Johnny did, again, making that connection between school and home, right? That collaborative discussion.
And that is like the nth degree of consistency. Yep. Like that is ultimately the level of consistency that we want to get to. So I want to give you guys a pretty big chunk of time to work with each other at your table groups. You can kind of wander around and have conversation with each other if you want to. But I really want you guys to focus on looking at those school-wide expectations, because I think those are fabulous. They're already well thought out. You guys have been marketing that information. This is an opportunity to look at that matrices and think about, are there things that maybe we could readjust? And then as a classroom teacher, as an instructor, think about what are those challenging behaviors that I see the most in the classroom, and how can I focus my classroom rules aligned to my expectations on some of those. Like if I know that I typically have problems with calling out. What are some of the expectations? What are the rules? What is it that I want them to be doing, and how do I fit that into my matrix? So I really want to give you guys like 15-20 minutes right now and see where you're at. Use this time to get up and move if you need to. There's plenty of candy that should keep us going for a little while. And then I think there's chips and snacks back there too, so if you need to reinvigorate, please do. But I will set a timer and then check in with you guys in a little bit, and we'll be walking around too to help. And I'll leave the activity up there so you guys know what you're doing. But this is your time. So let's talk about some of the tweaks, because you guys were all very actively engaged during that activity, which means that you saw some areas that you could improve upon, which is fabulous. And hopefully we're thinking about how this applies in your classroom. So what were some of the conversations that you guys had? What were some of the tweaks that you made? Just so everybody can hear, because you guys were probably thinking along the same lines on a lot of things.
We joined this group here, and
Yes.
basically we're talking about, for example, like if it says S for show respect,
Yes.
each of the matrices boxes doesn't really refer to something that says respect.
Right.
So we thought, yeah, those things are great, which we can add to, but there needs to be, like, for example, in PE, show respect to your equipment, but what about your teachers? What about your fellow peers? Things like that. So add that verbiage into each of the areas.
Exactly, and that matrix, just so you guys know, and this may influence your future work with this, you can have more than one thing in those boxes.
Yeah.
So showing, doing your best may have 2 or 3 things in the classroom. You just want to make sure that it's no more than 5. I would say 3 is a pretty good number of things. That's pretty easy for us to keep in our mind, because we also want to orient ourselves to this regularly, and not that you have to have it all memorized, because you're going to have visual supports up, hopefully, to remind students and be able to kind of point out those visual supports. But you can have more than one, absolutely. And it is good to think about, okay, if I'm showing respect in PE, I'm showing respect to my equipment, then I need to teach. What does that look like? What does that mean? If I'm showing respect to my teachers, that means that I have my eyes on them. I'm actively listening. Right? So again, you want to define those behaviors that let us know that you are doing your best or showing respect. What were some of the other conversations?
We came up with, like with the whole DBS, where the video showed how to establish classroom rules through a collaborative exercise, that you could also translate that collaborative exercise to each one of these things like a day, and see what the kids think doing your best is.
Yes.
And then refining that, like at the end of the week, to what we wanted to add into our classroom behaviors.
Absolutely, because again, and doing my best, I may not have the same opinion of what my best is that you have of me doing my best. In fact, I'm pretty self-deprecating, so my doing my best is probably not that great compared to what other people may think. So it's helping students kind of understand what that doing your best looks like, and that it is individualized. Even though we're creating this consistency for everybody, we are still individuals. So doing my best is still going to look a little differently, but I know in the classroom this is the expectation for doing my best. That's great. That's great. And students can certainly work through that acronym and kind of define what those things look like. I want you guys to talk a little bit, because you have kind of different circumstances, and you guys had a great idea about that individualization process.
Yes. Yeah, basically, for us, we said we might have to individualize it per student, take the school-wide expectations and kind of spell it out depending on the student. And, everybody might have their own little list of clarification as to what those expectations would be for them.
Absolutely. So when we think about a student who needs that intensive level of support, this might be one of those intensive supports. Maybe we take those expectations and we shrink it down and we laminate it and we focus on what does doing your best as an individual look like, and it goes right on their desk. That's really an intervention. When you think about it, you could align that to the student's IEP goals. You could align that to anything in their behavior intervention plan or a behavior agreement that may be in place. And then we also talked about that, doing your best may look different from week to week. So maybe that could be something that you write on like a dry erase, so that you can change that and make that current for what they're working on, the goals that they're working on for that period of time. That's fabulous. So you have your classroom rules, but then you can drill down even further and have those individualized based on those expectations, because remember, the expectation is that consistency. What I'm doing is just defining what those behaviors look like across different settings and for different individuals. That's such a great idea.
So I was curious to hear from tables or groups, if you made any tweaks to the actual rules within each of the settings, what those tweaks were.
Yeah. Come on, Janelle, bring it out.
Throw it out to the group is, I know that you use, the DBES, But will all students know what each of those expectations mean just by the letters? And I'm just
Right.
asking.
Will they know the
I've added that.
acronym?
Okay, so that was a
Good.
discussion that you guys had.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There's
So-
posters that we have for our classroom.
Oh, great.
That kind of spell it out. And then, like we were talking about, then you can expand on it by a classroom activity.
Yes.
That builds, you know, I guess more meaningful understanding of what each one of those things would mean in our classroom.
Absolutely. So I will take some time this afternoon to orient you to some online resources, specifically a Canvas page that houses a lot of resources. And they've got lesson plans specific to teaching some of these expectations and classroom rules and how you would do that. Because again, the idea is that we teach some of this as intensively as we teach some of our academic skills. So we may need to take time to actually walk students through what those behaviors look like in the cafeteria, in the media center, right? As a classroom, maybe we need to schedule time to come down to the media center as a group and say, if we are prepared, we have our IDs ready. Does everybody have their ID ready? We have our books ready. Does everybody have their book ready? The other benefit to some of those rules, as far as that kind of classroom management procedure and routines, is you can do that prior to transitions, right? Remember, we're going to move from this activity to this activity. Being prepared when we transition looks like this. So you can really use that as that prompting or kind of preemptive teaching when we transition, when we're moving out into the hallway. Remember, our hallway rules aligned to our expectations look like this. In the hallway, you use walking feet. In the hallway, you use an indoor voice. So before we even go out in the hallway, I'm going to review those. So everybody's on the same page. Great teaching opportunities.
Even when you transition within your classroom.
Absolutely.
So, you know, work at your seat, right, or your desk. There's different expectations as far as raising your hand and what safe looks like, or, you know, compared to, you know, what it's like sitting at the carpet, you know, or when you're working with a small group at, you know, at your table. So you can even divide, you know, specific rules into different settings within your classroom also, right? Because if you always have raise your hand to talk as one of your rules in your classroom, is it the best rule? Because is it for all situations in your classroom, right? So you kind of have to, you know, think about that as well.
And also, this is a fluid process. None of this is written in stone after this. These are things that can be tweaked and changed.
Right, they
Absolutely,
have to be.
absolutely, absolutely. Because again, kids are going to find loopholes. There are going to be loopholes. There's going to be inconsistency.
Or the needs of the behaviors in your class change.
Yeah.
And so you might have to tweak some of the rules to kind of match or target those behaviors, right? Or the
Absolutely.
needs of your kids in your class.
Any other conversations, any other tweaks, any other ideas that came from this? I know, I saw people make, yeah, please.
I mean, we focused on our classroom though.
Yes.
And we were just talking about like what we know like each, you know, acronym stands for as a teacher. But we also talked about what they were talking about, having the students engage in what that looks like for them. So, but we wanted to know like what does it look like for us so that when they do it, like we know what we're expecting from them.
Absolutely. That's incredibly powerful. Absolutely. Yeah.
And one thing that actually is helpful, for example, to us, the instructional assistants, for example, we have to actually adjust to each area because we float a lot. So we have to be aware of what those expectations are and make sure that we communicate very well with the teacher or with the cafeteria staff or with the coaches, you know, as we're moving from one area to another. And I found last year, you know, as one of the cafeteria monitors, that we had our expectations in the cafeteria, and we shared that with the teachers and let them know consistently how they were doing, how their students, you know, if there was any tweaks that we needed, or if they were really good, you know.
Yeah.
And it always helps having that feedback back and forth. Communications is extremely important.
Yeah.
You know, maintaining that consistency and that fluency.
Absolutely.
And I felt the same way. I was a school counselor, so you know I went into every single classroom, right? And so there were some years that I'd be like, "What are your expectations and your rules?" so that I could use them, you know. And the years that these things were in place, it was beautiful, you know, because I was able to walk in, I knew what the school expectations were, I could look to see the specific rules for that classroom. We had a school-wide system that I was able to implement as a school counselor as well, as far as reinforcement. So it does help for people who maybe don't have a home base to be able to kind of walk in and have that same communication expectation. Absolutely.
Yes, yes. And again, even administrators walking into the classroom, is that easily visible to an administrator so that I know that consistency, so that when I'm observing, I know what the expectation is for this activity or for this task or for this chunk of time or whatever it may look like. One of the things that I have seen some schools do, especially for those people that interact with multiple settings all the time, is they'll make smaller ones and they'll put it on a loop and they'll have them on the back so that they can kind of refer for the first few weeks, months, whatever it takes. And that way, you know, you have that. Even instructional staff, if you need to know the playground and the cafeteria and the bus loop, because that's where your duty is, then print smaller ones so that it's still visible, so you're not like this the entire time. And just put them on a key ring, laminate them, put them on a little key ring, and that way you've got that. Again, visual prompts work for everybody. That's a great reminder. It helps us orient back. And again, if they're posted and they're very easily visible, then I can, even as a classroom teacher, maybe I don't remember all the cafeteria rules, but if I assume that it's being violated, I can look right over at the poster and say, oh yeah, they're supposed to be doing this, this, and this. And then I can orient the student back to that and say, remember, in the cafeteria, showing respect or doing your best looks like this. Can you practice that for me? What does that look like? Great job, thank you, right? So having that teaching opportunity. Anything else? That was great work. So let me remind you guys, or I guess not remind you because I don't think I've said this prior. You are going to have an opportunity to have lunch provided here, which was very nice. So you guys are going to have a chance to kind of talk and eat and work through some of these activities that maybe you didn't finish. And then again, I think you've got time allotted next week to really do some more consistent work on this. So I apologize, we have to kind of stop and start a few activities, or start and then stop a few activities. But again, this is for you guys to grow. Schools that just start this PBIS process, because systems change takes time, sometimes they take a year to put things in place. So again, I know you probably feel pressure to make sure that everything is in place, and there are some things that you want to have in place that you can really focus your effort on right now, and there are some things that you guys can allow to have a little bit more time, so don't feel a lot of anxiety and pressure.
Whether that conversation starts today or next week, when you guys as a group, get back together to work on this stuff, you'll be able to prioritize like short and long-term goals for the year. So, what are your short-term goals for this year, maybe even like the first month, first 2 months, first semester for the year, and then, what are we going to focus on next year and the year after that. So, again, like Jenna said, it's, this is systems change, it's a process, it takes time, but you just kind of keep chipping away at it, and today's the first step towards that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, honestly, you're engaged in that process now because you've had things in place, and it's good to come back and retweak and refresh and kind of revitalize. So we want to take a little bit of time to talk about factors that may impact behavior. In my world, in the behavior analysis world, these are like our triggers, our setting events, those things that may impact behavior, but we're going to dig a little bit deeper and kind of talk about some of those outside variables that influence our students in the classroom, and ultimately they influence us too. Like, we're not impervious, we're human. So there are things that happen to us prior to coming into the classroom that impacts how our day goes. I always share the example that there was a year that I had a really tough group of students, and I promise you my hand would touch the door and I would just like say to myself, oh God, it's another day, right? Like, I can't. And as my students entered, I think they felt that from me. And not only did they feel it, but my behavior was different because I wasn't energized. I didn't smile as much. And people are impacted by that. And so what I thought was going to be a bad day, ultimately, guess what? They turned into bad days, right? So whether it's a self-fulfilling prophecy or whether it's literally like how we respond to behavior, It is important to, again, identify those positives and focus on those strengths so that we make sure that we have that good opportunity. So another activity that I want you guys to engage in. I want you to think about in your classroom or students that you work with, 4 of the most preferred students that come to the top of your mind, and then 4 of the students that engaged in some challenges. You're not as preferred students, because again, they're not bad kids, they're just kids with some challenges. Don't share their names, just picture their bright, smiling little faces in your head, right? And then I want you to flip over onto a blank piece of paper, or the back of one of the pieces of paper, and list what you know about those 8 students. Your most preferred, and the students that exhibited some challenges for you. And just list everything that you might know about them. You can use their initials. So talk to me about your lists. Was it easy for you guys to come up with 8 students? See, you think you repress everything, don't you? It's all there. It was difficult? You had some challenges?
No, it was very easy coming up with both sides, actually.
Yeah. I know. I teach a lot about universal design, and that's what we tend to, right? We see the best and the worst, and we kind of forget some of the kids in between sometimes. Yeah, absolutely.
Did anybody else have like one that you put him as either preferred or not preferred, and then all of a sudden you thought, wait a minute, no, he was the other type.
Right. Oh, I'm sure. Anybody else experienced that? Any?
I went through that.
Yeah. She's like, nope, it was pretty easy. I got it. Right? That's how I grouped. I totally understood what I was doing. That's how I did my seating plans. Yeah, absolutely. What about coming up with what you know about them? What were some of the things that you guys know about some of those kids? And let me know if it was preferred or non-preferred so that I can...
Well, on mine I put like the more the preferred, more the parents are more involved, whether it's behavior or academically. The non-preferred, most of the parents made up excuses. Like no matter what it was an excuse for whatever they did. And so not a lot of involvement, but excuses.
Yeah, okay. I can see people shaking their heads. Yeah, that probably rings true, right? Those little tyrants. Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, what I caught myself doing when I was doing the list of the preferred and non-preferred was the preferred got all that positive parent involvement, and then the not preferred got all the negative, no parent involvement, and then I was like, wait a minute. So then I forced myself to think, okay, he was good at sport, loved reading, was great with other kids, and then at the preferred, accident prone, not good with sports, right? Gotta do that shift of thinking as well. So it's positive because I prefer you, and then it's like negative because I don't want you type of deal.
Absolutely. And don't you think that we have this implicit bias that happens where we unintentionally do that? Absolutely. And again, human nature. It's human nature to categorize and to understand people in those kind of boxes and to kind of focus on those things. That's so exactly what needs to happen when we think about doing this. And it's easy to do when we're forced in kind of an activity to rethink that, but then we also have to go, wait a second, it's been 4 weeks since we had that training and I'm already starting to revert back to old habits. How do I redo this again? So how do we kind of make that a habit to think differently about it? Absolutely. What else? Yeah.
I thought about more the motivators, and the preferred ones were the ones that were typically self-motivated and just knew what was expected and knew how to do it, and the more challenging ones were the ones that needed the reminders and the reinforcement.
And maybe you didn't know which reinforcement they would work for, right? So what do you know about those kids? What makes them tick?
Yeah.
You might know more about the preferred child versus the non-preferred.
Absolutely. Very good point. Very good point.
And so you wonder too, is that like a relational thing? Is that, because we haven't spent time to find that out? What are the reasons behind that?
What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, kind of jumping out with what Lana was saying, I found myself going back to my non-preferred list, going, okay, there's got to be one good thing about each of these kids, which I know there is, and a lot of them were motivators. Okay, what did I know about so-and-so? What was the thing that made me tick?
Right.
What have you? And it forced me to go back
and look. I'm like, there is one good thing about each of these.
Sometimes there were days where I was just like, you have great tennis shoes on, kiddo. Like, love them.
You didn't kill somebody today.
Exactly.
You're like, you came to school.
There you go. Every day. Yeah. We all know that those are the kids that are here every day because who wants them at home with them?
Those are the parents that are like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, they're struggling. They may not have the skills or the knowledge or the resources or the understanding. Absolutely. So again, we have to kind of go back to and go, what do we know about the family? Right? And how do we flip that to the positive? I always tell this story because it really helped me flip my script. When I started as a paraprofessional, I worked for an amazing administrator, somebody that I still continue to have a relationship with because she was such a great mentor to me. And I am a student that struggled in school, so I didn't have a very good school history. So for me to be working in education, it was really because I got a substitute job because my mom was a teacher. So I was a substitute paraprofessional. I ended up working with this kid for years. And so I was very involved with his family and everything. But this administrator, one of the first couple of weeks that I was at the school, a parent came into the office and she was very aggressive. She was yelling. She was not happy. She said lots of great expletives. And I was just in the back like making copies, kind of in shock, in awe that somebody would come into the office because it was really my first experience with something like that. And the administrator came out, de-escalated that parent, addressed what their concerns were. The parent left and I walked out and I was like, what? Who does she think she is? Walking in here like yelling at you like that, how rude. And the administrator looked at me and she goes, you know what? How brave of that parent to have the guts to come in here and advocate that much for their child. She said, I can't judge how they love their kid. I just have to work with what I've got. I still get chills. Because every time I'm dealing with somebody who's difficult, I think, like, what's the silver lining? How do I flip this script? They may not be as involved, and they aren't a lot of the times, but where does that come from? And how do I see that through their lens? How do I empathize? How do I assist and help? And we get bogged down sometimes in the work of being an educator, that it's difficult to do that extra work, and to help families, because usually there's a history. Those are kids, they were kids that struggled. Every time I was in a meeting where a kid was going to Schwettman, right, because they were struggling, the parents would go, I went there, my cousin went there, I have family that, right? So there's this generational history of not being engaged with school. And so it's how do we build those relationships? Schwettman's the alternative school. You guys don't have to worry about that yet. None of your kids are going there yet. Hopefully. Goodness.
Yeah.
I know.
They're not going there.
They're not going there because of this right here. What were some of the other things that you guys thought about when you made your lists? Yeah.
Just piggybacking on, what you were saying, that I remember an administrator saying once that they're sending you the best kid they have at home.
Yes.
And sometimes we think because there's maybe not preferred behavior that there's not parent involvement, but there could be parent frustration.
Yes.
And they don't know what to do
They don't
either.
have the skills.
So, or sometimes if they're constantly just hearing the negative, then it just becomes white noise and then they tune you out. So then there's the lack of involvement because they're like, well, you've already given up on my kid.
And every time you've communicated with them, it's about something negative.
Challenging, yeah.
Right? So again, coming back to building those relationships, and it could be intergenerational, like Jenna was saying. And so, when they get those phone calls, having it just to be a positive phone call, like some teachers kind of have a rotating list of, which kids they're going to have a positive phone call or email, home to. So that way too, like when those difficult situations come up, because they're going to come up, the parent is more receptive to having those discussions, and they know you're calling because you care. Like you care when they're good and when they're,
And
making
the
poor
first
choices.
time you do that with a parent who has consistently gotten challenging phone calls, and again, you guys are going to be new to these kids. So if you do that, the reaction that you get from the family is just, it's intense. Because they haven't had that yet. I've had parents start crying. I've had parents be really confused. Like, are you sure you're calling right now? This is this kid you're talking about, right? Absolutely. Like, I love that they're here every single day. That they make the time to get to know me. So it is. We really do have to focus our energy on kind of changing the way we think sometimes. when we start talking about behavior, and I think I say this every single time, we get bogged down. I have been called out to classrooms to consult and to work on behavior, and people always have the expectation that I'm going to come out and fix a kid. Yeah. I have never fixed a kid. I have fixed the classroom environment, seating arrangements, the lighting, the way that people respond to that student, their activities, their engagement. I've done all of that, but I have never yet fixed a kid. If I fixed a kid, I would be a bazillionaire, right? It's us. We have to do some of the changing. It's our responses. It's the way that our classroom is set up sometimes. That's who we have to do some. Oh, look at me. Everybody looked over there all of a sudden. I was like, no squirrel. It was a very squirrel moment, wasn't it? It was a squirrel there. Yeah. Any other ahas that came up from making your lists? Yeah.
I think one important thing as teachers, and sometimes we can't help it, but you know those kids. And automatically you have this impression of these kids, and it's like, oh God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes we just really need to get out of that mindset and see something good in that child.
Absolutely. Everybody